Good evening, everybody. My name is Kirsten Green. I'm the Executive Director of Retired Racehorse Project. Welcome to Aftercare Industry Month. This webinar series is made possible by a grant from the Thoroughbred Education and Research Foundation. Aftercare Industry Month is an evolution of something that we started a couple of years ago, actually, with Jen Roytz as our RRP's immediate past executive director. That was run in conjunction with the Thoroughbred Makeover, which is RRP's kind of flagship event. And we partnered with Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, Thoroughbred Charities of America, and Thoroughbred Incentive Program. That's a lot of alphabet soup going on there, but it's very representative of the diversity of organizations that are within the aftercare landscape that are making a contribution to this transitional period in the lives of these horses. And we wanted to create a networking opportunity and also an educational opportunity. But the reality is that everybody's very busy at the makeover and very focused on other things. And so we wanted to adjust things a little bit and maybe do it in the winter when there weren't as many other more exciting things to go do like horse shows, and do it virtually in a method that would hopefully increase accessibility for everybody. So that's kind of the progression of how we got here. And I just want to take a moment to touch on why does RRP do things like the Aftercare Summit or Aftercare Industry Month. Our mission is to increase demand for thoroughbreds beyond racing, and we do that through three core mission tenets, which are education, inspiration, and service. And so this is kind of like a mixing pot of all those things all at one. But in the other work that we do, you could access services like listing services exclusively for thoroughbreds. You could take advantage of our newly overhauled educational library, which has a year's worth of curated articles and quality information, or participate in the makeover, whether as a trainer or as a volunteer, just to kind of take advantage of the inspiration component. But in the case of AIM, Aftercare Industry Month, we're giving you a little bit of everything. So you've got a webinar series that is a service to you, and hopefully you get some inspiration and some education along the way. The other part of that is that RRP is in a unique situation in that as an entity that doesn't take on ownership of horses, we're interfacing with everybody that's in the aftercare space. So the trainers in the makeover, the nonprofit facilities, the listing agents, the track-based programs. There's so many entities that are operating in this space, and we want to be of service to all of those people. And that's regardless of whether or not you have a charitable status. If you're a for-profit, there's so many people that are making this industry successful and efficient and effective in North America, and we want to make sure that you are celebrated and supported. So that is kind of why we're here today. So I hope that everybody will join us every Tuesday night in the month of February at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we have, after this evening, 3 more sessions, and you can learn more about that on our website, therrp.org. And just a quick housekeeping note, we will be using the Q&A function in your webinar settings. So if you have anything, I'll be checking that periodically, and we'll make sure to cover your questions. Without further ado, I want to introduce our panel, who I'm proud to say represents a broad and diverse backgrounds, not just across the 3 of them, but in each of their respective backgrounds, both in nonprofit and for-profit and different modalities of aftercare. So first, I am going to introduce again Jen Roytz, who operates Brownstead Farm. Jen, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, horse-obsessed kid, and really got interested in horse racing because it was the only thing that I could watch on TV, and because the lesson horses I was riding growing up were thoroughbreds, which I thought was so cool that they were former professional athletes. I ended up working on the backside of Thistledown when I was a teenager and really wanted to go to college someplace where I could be around horse racing. So came to Kentucky to go to college, galloped at the track in the morning to put myself through school, and then tried to do as much networking as I could while I was in college. So when I graduated, I ended up landing a job with a marketing firm that represents some of the biggest names in thoroughbred racing. At the time, they had a client list that included Keeneland, Windstar Farm, Darby Dan Farm, the NTRA, and several other organizations. And I ended up being the account manager for a lot of those different clients, as well as the PR liaison for first those clients and then the agency. And that led me to a job at Three Chimneys Farm as their director of marketing. And while I was there, I just kept getting more and more interested in the aftercare side and what happens to horses after they retire. I had always kind of retrained and sold horses off the track as a means of, but working at Three Chimneys on a brooding farm of that scale, producing several hundred horses a year, standing stallions, selling at the sales, and owning race horses, it just made me a lot more interested in it. So I started helping clients with aftercare, and I also started writing a column for the Pollock Report called OTTB Showcase, which I wrote for about 7 years. And after that, I ended up going out on my own, started my marketing agency, which I'm still a partner in with a friend of mine, and we've kind of grown organically since then. And I was on the board of the RRP while I was at Through Chimneys, and then evolved into taking on the executive director role when Stuart Pittman, who's the founder, needed to step back to pursue what has become a very successful political campaign. And was involved with RRP for 6 years as a board member and then 4 years as executive director, while also trying to juggle my marketing agency and also the farm that my husband and I have that also kept growing exponentially based on what our very small goals were. So I ended up stepping back, and Kirsten has very expertly taken the reins and taken RRP above and beyond what I could have imagined. And now I oversee our farm. We're a thoroughbred racing, breeding, and sales operation. We also do a lot of aftercare, both for our own homebreds and for client horses. And I also buy a handful off the track. So I try to turn over about 12 a year or so in sport horse, racehorse to sport horse transitions, or broodmares. I've done a couple of broodmares too. So it's not on the scale of these other women, but it's kind of a good balance to what they offer. It's kind of the boutique model for profit aftercare.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Next, I want to introduce Jessica Redman, who operates Benchmark Sporthorses in Delaware. Jessica, tell us a little bit about your background.
I grew up near Maryland, and we had 2 farms, one in Maryland and one in Delaware. My family owned racehorses, and we had about 100 horses at one point stabled between Delaware Park and our farm. So my background is we had broodmares, we had babies, we had 2-year-olds, a little bit of everything. And then my mom had a lesson program, so she was always doing a bit of retraining herself. And so that was a little bit of how I came up in Pony Club. And then I started doing some retraining as a way to pay for college. And then I kind of morphed into just doing a little bit of sales on my own, but then also got involved with Canter Mid-Atlantic, worked for them for about 6 years, I started the Delaware Park branch, and we kind of got a nice listing service going there. We had some horses that we were retraining, rehoming. I want to say we were probably the first organization that was involved with the original RRP. So we were on ground from the very first RRP event that they did. We brought some Canter Mid-Atlantic horses that we were retraining. And then with some life changes, I sort of took a full leap into starting my own resale business, and it has really grown more than I ever expected. We're now doing about 200 horses a year. And I do work a full-time job outside of doing my sales business. So it's sort of like 2 full-time jobs, I guess, but a labor of love, and I do really love it. So we're doing the for-profit, but I have so much respect for those in the nonprofit business. It's really hard, really hard.
Okay. And Nina Lyman of TRRAC, or Thoroughbred Retirement Rehabilitation and Careers. Probably the only organization in aftercare whose name is longer than Retired Racehorse Project.
Yes. So I grew up in Chester County, Pennsylvania, which I still live in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Both of my parents were race trackers, trained and galloped racehorses. And I grew up on a farm full of thoroughbreds. It was kind of like a mixed bag of brood mares and stallions, babies, things like that. But on the flip side, they also showed their horses as well. My mom was really heavy into horse showing. So I got both aspects of racing and showing at a young age. And I was probably the only kid in the show barn that had thoroughbreds right off the track that I just loved retraining. I was offered the nice, kind pony to jog me around, and I learned how to ride on off-track thoroughbreds, or thoroughbreds in general. And that was just my breed of choice. And we frequented the sales, and also before aftercare was a thing, we would find, you know, some horses that came off the track and maybe some bad situations, and kind of fixed them up and found them homes. And I homeschooled all through my high school years, which allowed me to catch ride for various people that mostly had thoroughbreds, like either as fox hunters or polo horses. And then I transitioned into galloping on the track. I galloped at Delaware Park, Parks Racing, which was Philadelphia Park back in the day. And then I joined the Maui Meadow team in 2007 into 2008. Actually, it might have been 2006. Just, you know, breaking babies, handling brood mares, assisting with foaling, breeding thoroughbreds, getting them to the racetrack in general. And we also handled a very large amount of rehabilitative, which was our main business, horses with the swimming in the pool. And the way we kind of got into aftercare was, or I got into aftercare, we would have horses that maybe just weren't going to make it back to the track, and we would take them over and find them awesome homes. We do a little bit of retraining. So we started our first year with 12 intakes, and I think our top number was 85 as of last year, horses that came into our program. We became an official nonprofit in 2017, and we work with 5 major racetrack aftercare organizations to this day.
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, so I think the common thread here is diversity of background and demonstrated ability to make businesses grow. Each and every one of you has your own success story and your own track here, and I think is making like a significant and meaningful significant and meaningful contribution to the aftercare landscape, regardless of how you chose to structure your business and be involved. And that's just something like, forgive me if I belabor this throughout the conversation, but I just think that that's something that's so important to talk about, you know, especially for people that are thinking about getting into this industry, or, you know, for people that are already within the industry and looking for ways to kind of expand their network, and, you know, expand the reach of their programs and that sort of thing. Like, there is no reason, you know, our tax status and business structure choices do not need to prohibit us from working together. And I think, Jen, you, as we were preparing for this, made a really good point about, you know, if you're wanting to get involved in this industry, like how important the networking and everything is. So I'd love to hear from each of you kind of how, when you were, did you knowingly make a decision to get involved, like, in aftercare? Like, if we think about how long we've been racing in this country versus how long we have needed that transitional service. Like that has been around for like a fraction of the amount of time that we've been racing in the United States, right? But it's experienced so much growth in the past couple of decades, particularly as the horses standing and use within our culture has changed, and the thoroughbred standing as a sport horse has kind of evolved. How do things look different now versus kind of when you got involved, and how did that kind of influence how you choose to be involved in the aftercare industry today?
Who do you want to go first?
I was gonna say, who's first?
Fine.
I mean, I'll go first since
okay.
I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest one on here. So 700 years ago when I started with Aftercare, when I was in college and galloping and whatnot, I don't really think aftercare was a term. Like it wasn't in the racing vernacular. So to me, that's like the biggest, most general change that I've seen come about. That like after there's a word for it and there's a rudimentary understanding of it. I still don't think that the average horseman has an acceptable knowledge of what aftercare truly is beyond like transitioning a horse into a career after racing. I wish that the racing industry, and like we race, we breed, like I'm talking about a lot of the people we work with as well. I don't think the average person in the racing industry truly understands how much goes into transitioning horse away from the track in the same way they understand how much goes into getting horse to the sale or to the races, you know? But I think it's evolved tremendously. I think organizations like the RRP, the TCA, the TAA, TIP have really helped to bolster what aftercare is and put it on the map more and legitimize it as like an acceptable part of this overall business model of horse racing. I think we have a ways to go, but to me, that's the biggest change since I started. Like, I will date myself. I graduated from college in 2003, and that's when I started my professional career. So over the last 20, tremendous change, but I'd say we are maybe halfway to where it really should be, probably not even halfway. So it's like progress doesn't happen in a day, but it's not where it needs to be yet.
I found it interesting because when I was growing up, I remember our racehorses going to like the sales, like New Holland and things like that. And that was the method back then. Like it was common. It was not kind of what it is now. Like I do think there were a lot of people that like went there to buy horses, but I remember just sort of thinking, you know, why is there not a way, you know, to market these horses without them needing to go to places like that? So that's kind of like what got me passionate about it. And I remember doing like my first like dream horse ads back when that was like the way we marketed was, you know, using dream horse. And you know, there was no Facebook or anything like that. And then, you know, I got kind of involved in the nonprofit because I saw, okay, so there are these people like going to the tracks doing these listing services, and I was really interested in that. I was like, I want to get involved in this, because what they were doing was bringing the ability to market horses to the trainers. A lot of trainers just did not have sort of the, you know, understanding of how to market these horses. So I do think listing services were really valuable. I think that it's changed and that the listing services are getting phased out a little bit because you have so many people that are now involved in aftercare. I do think the average trainer is more knowledgeable than they were 20 years ago. I think they have more resources. You know, obviously we can always do better, but I do think there's been a significant change. And if you've seen the shift, I remember when I got involved in Canter, you know, we used to go to the track and list 30 horses a weekend. And now you're really not seeing as many listings. And I think that is because more people are handling their own aftercare, and there's more people involved in the aftercare industry that are, you know, sort of getting to these horses and helping these trainers kind of as resources. So I think I've seen that shift, and, you know, but that's like, you know, where my passion started was, I think we can do better. And it's just always about, you know, what else can we do? How can we do better?
Yeah, and I'll kind of go off like what Jess said. You know, many moons ago, you saw horses, thoroughbreds off the track at New Holland, and it wasn't uncommon to walk the rows. I mean, you know, when I was young, I remember my parents would pick up a couple here and there and bring them home, and we would retrain them and find them homes. But I think technology, as we've grown in humanity, has really helped with the listings. We now have more of an outlook on trainers that are realizing what aftercare is. So for example, you know, back in the day, I used to hand out flyers at the tracks and say, you know, we're aftercare. And they're like, oh, no. Like, you know, I'm going to send this horse here, or I'm going to send it here. Now, 10 years into it and going into 2024, our phones are ringing and we're having trainers say, you know, and of course we still, like everybody said, we still have a long ways to go, but because these resources are now evolving and everything constantly evolves, it doesn't stop. Like we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing. We are getting trainers that are realizing the importance of aftercare and how it reflects against them. And quite honestly, I get repeat trainers that send multiple horses to us a year out of their barn, and I send them photos and I'm like, here's your horse, you know, at RRP, or here's your horse at TIP, or here's your horse going on to great things. And some of the trainers that we work with actually have quote unquote second careers of their own. So they're not just race trainers as well, but, and that helps aftercare. I mean, it is evolving with the resources that we're given, but I think we have ways to go, you know, to keep going.
Yeah. So I think for each of you, again, touching on the diversity in your background of having a variety of experiences, both from the for-profit and nonprofit, and what made you choose the business structure that you went with, whether it's, you know, for-profit, nonprofit, and is your operation, like, we probably touched on this a little bit in your introductions, but is your operation kind of like integrated with a larger business, like a larger stable or farm? Nina, could you go first in terms of how you kind of made that decision?
Sure. Yeah. So being with Maui Meadow Farm, our main focus besides breeding and raising our own thoroughbreds was rehabilitation. And that's kind of where my specialty shifted. I kind of stopped galloping racehorses and I got really into the rehabilitative side and working with like New Bolton Center and Mid-Atlantic, and really close with the vets and understanding different injuries and how to heal them, and utilizing that aspect kind of shifted me into the nonprofit side versus the business side, where I could bring horses in that had maybe injuries that just limited them for a racing career, or that their trainers didn't want to go on with them. And I could focus my specialties onto helping those horses. But along with the nonprofit, and I do all my own marketing and social media, I was able to, you know, draw in people to join our board and to donate and to help assist in that realm. So that's why I went towards the nonprofit. The business side really helped influence that. And actually our first horse that we took in before the nonprofit that kind of made us make this leap into it was, he was a 4-year-old that had a bowed tendon, and the trainer didn't have the finances to lay him up, and he was done racing. He was not going to go back to the track. And he had called us up and he said, I can't pay you. I can't afford to lay him up. He had a very, very small stable. And I said, listen, I can fix him, you know, I can rehabilitate him. And we did, and we found him an amazing home, and we kind of just turned to one another. And we were like, this is great. And we started working with Turning for Home, and Turning for Home started utilizing us because we had the swimming pool, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So that's kind of where my expertise lie. And I wanted to take that knowledge and apply it within the nonprofit aspect. And we just don't, like for us, we don't just rehome horses. We like to educate as well. So sometimes we do educational seminars, and we do with our adopters, we do give free information on rehabilitation or nutrition or whatever. And it all connects together, and it's just really cool. It's amazing to connect with our adopters and have repeat adopters and have people reach out. And I think that's really important for a nonprofit.
Definitely. How about you, Jess?
So like for me, it was almost a bit of a forced decision, but I'd been working for Canner and maybe doing like a couple of sales. And then I went through a divorce, and I was sort of faced with having to make a decision on, how I was going to afford to keep my farm by myself. And, so I would kind of just was like, well, what am I really good at? What are the skills that I have that can really kind of like grow a business? And for me, that was just, I thought I'm really good at finding horses. Like that's my specialty. I really spend a ton of time researching bloodlines, picking conformations, picking the horses that I really think are going to excel in the sport horse world. And then just putting a couple rides on them, doing just enough to show what that horse is going to be for those buyers that aren't comfortable going to the track. And they want a little bit more information from somebody that's, done 1,000+ horses and can say, this horse is going to be good at this, and it's going to be this kind of, need this kind of rider. And so that's kind of our skill set here. Is we are really good at, I like to think, good at picking, assessing, and restarting horses. And, it's just also for me being able to do sales business. I can work it around my full-time job, and it's just very flexible, so I think I like it because I'm only accountable to myself. Our horses do as much or as little as needed, and really have no set schedule, no agenda. It's just sort of, we just do the best we can. Sometimes we're really busy, sometimes it's not so busy, but I think it works well for what we do. And it's grown to where now I have a couple employees. I have 2 riders that ride for me, and I do most of the pictures, the video, all the social media, Facebook, all that, all my own marketing. So that we spend a lot of time on, and just kind of, really trying to highlight why thoroughbreds are great sport horses. And we talk a ton about bloodlines and how that matters in picking sport horses, and, trying to draw people into the industry and sort of show that these horses can compete, at the top of the discipline.
Thanks. And how about you, Jen?
My background kind of has towed that line between for-profit and nonprofit. As far as Aftercare is concerned, I've always tried to be very supportive and involved with aftercare related charities, on committees or volunteering and whatnot. And then obviously with the RRP in more of an executive leadership role. But for our business with our farm, aftercare is part of our business model. So it's a for-profit approach to it. A lot of our homebreds, our goal when we breed a horse ideally is to sell that horse probably at the Keeneland September sale, unless it fits better at a different sale. And we send each one with a note attached to their digital certificate saying that, if they don't have a plan for that horse at the conclusion of its career, we'll happily take it back and take care of the aftercare. And then I also try to not be a creep about it, but reach out to every person who owns one of the horses that have been bred at our farm, and just always let them know that it's an open line of communication. If they ever need to retire, it doesn't matter if it's due to injury or slowness or behavior or whatever, it can always come back here. So we end up usually selling most of our horses twice. Twice, we've sold them 3 times. But usually we sell them as yearlings, cheer them on from afar. They retire from the track. If they're fillies or mares, a lot of times they'll go on to breeding careers, and people want to retain them as breeding stock, and they're worth more that way. But for a lot of the geldings we breed, they come back here, and I retrain them. I usually it's a little bit different model than what these two are talking about. I usually have them for about 3 to 6 months, try to get a really good foundation on them, get them traveling off site into horse shows and that kind of thing. And my goal is to just make them AMI friendly mounts or kid friendly mounts. Not every horse is going to be that way, but that's my goal with most of them. And the way most of ours are handled as babies, that tends to come really easily to them. So our model is for profit. However, nonprofits are a really important aspect of aftercare. I think for profit and nonprofit are equally important when it comes to aftercare. I really don't think one is more important than the other. So I try to stay really involved on the nonprofit side with different charities I'm on the board for, help with fundraising or give back in other ways like volunteering, like doing a webinar on a Tuesday night. So I think that's a really important way to stay involved in the nonprofit side. And sometimes we have horses that, like, let's say we have one that's retiring at Santa Anita, and maybe the better decision for that horse is to pay a donation to help that horse get into an aftercare organization out there rather than travel across the country to come back to us. So we work a lot with nonprofits in that way as well. It's always just about doing what is going to position that horse in the best possible path to get onto a second career and in a safe spot.
You guys have touched on two kind of, channels of aftercare that I think really deserve a bit more attention, and that I think we're seeing a lot of just growth in that area and success. I think, Nina, you talked about your work with Turning for Home, which is based at parks, and we have a number of other ones around the country that are modeled similarly, many of which you worked with New Start Beyond the Wire. And I think what is so wonderful about how those organizations function is that there's usually a liaison that is an employee of the track or an employee of the horsemen's group, and is really very integrated into the backside community, and is trusted. And, so that there is a very definitive point person that's kind of available all the time. And they are usually working with a network of farms, and those farms could be for profit or nonprofit. Turning for Home's a great example. She has a range of partner farms. I think she usually has about a dozen or so at any given time that are working with Turning for Home. And I think that that's just a really effective way to address the kind of niche needs of every single backside. And it just kind of, it bolsters the facility efforts, and but also I think just that kind of liaison there in the community I think is so great. And can you touch a little bit, Nina, on what it was like kind of getting started and working so closely with all of those track-based programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you were saying, it's kind of like a web for us. So you have, your central hub at the track, and then it kind of branches off. So, we have on those boards for those aftercare programs, you have veterinarians or executive director, or, somebody that goes out to the trainers. And I try and visit the tracks with Turning for Home or Aftercare Charlestown or something like that, but working with them and having a central person at that point is really nice because it builds that rapport with that trainer that we're helping these horses. And they will often go out and meet with the veterinarian, run diagnostics, watch the horse jog. They take videos, they take photos, that, and then they relay that information back to us. And we actually use an electronic kind of communications and database to keep everybody informed. So we're not going back and forth with emails or phone calls or that sort of thing, where we can share information back and forth. But what we really want to achieve is keeping a really good rapport with our trainers, where they're not afraid to step up and knock on our door if there's a horse that needs to be retired safely. So keeping in with, having that community of people is extremely important with the communication to make sure that the horse arrives properly into aftercare, that all the paperwork is filed, that we've collected all the diagnostics, whether it's ultrasounds or x-rays, and we can give that horse the best possible outcome. And then, you know, I wish I had like a diagram to show everybody with the little arrows and things like that. But once that horse is entered into aftercare and say, you know, like Turning for Home moves in, and then they contact us. But the cool thing is also we get to talk to not just a trainer, but like the horse's grooms, and they will actually follow the horse. So once the horse leaves the track, they'll let them know, like, you know, the horse is going to, you know, track at Maui Meadow, and they'll follow the horse. And, you know, we give updates back to our partners at the racetrack, who then tell the trainers, like, oh, you know, the horse is at, you know, 90 days and he's doing great. He just had an assessment. He's on small paddock turnout, or he's at 6 months and he's out in the field, or he's at 8 months and they're just starting to ride him. And now it's this year point and we adopted him out, and here, look, here's a photo. So I think that's extremely important, because it is a lot of work to do and manage all of these things just as one person. Having a team at the racetrack really helps facilitate and keep the good rapport with the trainers. And one horse from one trainer turns into, you know, 10 more that they knock on the door and say, hey, you know, I'm back. I'd like to work with you guys and get this horse safely retired.
Yeah. And then kind of on another end of that, kind of more on the, not so much the racing side, but on the breeding side, Jen, like you've had so much experience, you know, whether working for Three Chimneys or doing a little bit of your own, in a area that we're seeing a lot more growth, where there's more of an in-house aftercare arm, whether it's somebody that kind of had an affinity for it and it got rolled in with their job description, or we're seeing a slightly more organized effort. Godolphin Lifetime Care obviously is one of the big ones, but I think we're just seeing an increased awareness and involvement of connections, staying involved in that transition and doing more of that in a hands-on approach, and kind of recognizing that it's the cost of doing business and not necessarily charity work. Like, you've made a decision to bring a horse into this world. It's a sentient being, and like your accountability for that, you know, carries through, which is so great to see. Do you have any tips or anything, you know, from that experience of working on the breeder's end and kind of in-house, of like, say if somebody is working for a small breeding operation and wants to start doing a little bit more of this sort of thing, what kind of tips do you have?
Yeah, so when I started at Three Chimneys, you know, I just got more and more interested in aftercare, and at that time, Godolphin may have been starting their aftercare initiatives, but Three Chimneys kind of was the first farm to be very publicly supportive of aftercare of the horses that were by the stallions, that sold through the consignment, that were bred by the farm. And the way we did that was like, in addition to being the marketing director and one of the client relations people, I was the aftercare liaison. And a lot of it was just doing the legwork for people, you know, checking in on horses that had turned in one poor performance after another at the bottom level, and just seeing if the owner or trainer wanted help trying to get that horse placed, and jumping through some of the hoops for them, or identifying if a horse ended up in a bad situation and making the calls and raising the money to try to get that horse out of a bad situation, and making sure the owner and the breeder and everyone involved with that horse was aware. So that's how I kind of got involved with it at Three Chimneys, and also just taking on the retraining of any of the farm's horses. As far as like how we do it at our farm, I'm very lucky that we have the right skill set to make it work and to make it part of our business model. My husband's a veterinarian. I know how to retrain horses and have a background that's equally got some depth in both, I don't want to say deep, but got depth in both the equestrian and competition side and the racing side. So it works really well for us to do it hands-on ourselves, and we have the facility to be able to do it with an arena and a round pen and all that kind of stuff. For other people or organizations that maybe don't have those opportunities. I think like Wasabi Ventures, which is a syndicate that races primarily on the East Coast, but they're really going all over the Midwest these days. They've created a nonprofit arm that complements the for-profit business that's called the Horse Fund. And that basically tracks any horse that's ever run in their colors. And they kind of do what I was doing at Three Chimneys, but they have some money behind it, because every time any of those investors in any of their horses, and it's a fractional ownership group, so you can own 1/4% of a horse for a couple $100, you know. Anytime there's any kind of transaction, there's a fee taken out to put toward aftercare. And then they also do fundraisers within their ownership group. They have an audience of, I think, about 600 or so people, or they'll even do fundraisers publicly to go toward that. And then they have a stipend that goes with any horse that they help transition off of the track. And some of these horses that they've helped maybe ran in their colors twice. There's one I'm thinking of in particular. They just helped out a couple weeks ago, named, I think his name was X Top, if I'm remembering the right story with the right horse, but I'm pretty sure I am. That horse carried their silks maybe 3 times. They claimed the horse. It ran for them a few times. It got claimed away, but they went above and beyond and worked to help that horse get off of the track and into a good aftercare program.
They've also sent a couple horses here as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've had maybe 5 or 6 that run with one of their trainers that networks with me, and they've just been great to work with. And it's just like, it's neat to see what they're doing, because, you know, they're just very invested in their horses.
I actually,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
have a Wasabi horse right now in aftercare.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to see everybody connecting.
Yeah, and I love that they work with both for-profit and nonprofit. It's just about getting their horses into good homes. And it's just a lot of legwork on the part of Michelle Kugler, their executive director, whose husband is the principal of the racing and breeding stable. West Point and Eclipse Thoroughbreds both do aftercare initiatives as well. They race on a much higher level. They buy 7-figure horses at the sales, and they're usually in the mix when it comes to like Derby, Oaks, Triple Crown, Breeders' Cup, all those big races. But they also have aftercare initiatives within their ownership groups. And then there's also individual breeders that just develop relationships with people like Jessica and Nina, or people like me who, you know, either they race their own horses and they know they can funnel them to these people, or they breed horses. Like there's a friend of mine who's been involved with racing for a decade, who breeds on a small scale, but she always makes sure that she reaches out to the connections of any horse she's bred as it looks like it's nearing the end of its career, to let them know like she will handle aftercare if they're not interested in keeping the horse. And those end up coming back to the farm. To me, she doesn't have her own farm, and then get retrained and sold. And she loves it because she gets to ride all of these horses that she's bred while they're in training. But it just gives her peace of mind. And I think, like Kirsten said, I think like all of us have kind of echoed, a lot of owners have, the advent of social media and the internet, a lot of owners have learned what aftercare scenario will work for them, or found the right people to hold their hand through that process. And they've just kind of found a practice that works for them. I think at the lower level of racing, where a lot of these horses exit racing, it's more of a for-profit model in some scenarios, because those owners like getting $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 for that horse instead of donating money with the horse is just what's going to work for them. They can't feasibly donate.
I was gonna, touch a little bit on that as well,
Yeah.
just because, in my business model, I have a lot of people that I work with that, just really think that, their horses are really valuable, which they are. I think we should really support that these horses have value, and the value has been steadily increasing in my experience. You are now seeing horses selling for, 5,000, 6,000, I mean, the prices are pretty high for horses coming off.
And verify it is on the rise.
And, I feel like, my role is to support those trainers that maybe don't want to donate, and show them that these horses, you know, I'm willing to pay, you know, mid four figures for a horse if I think I can, you know, bring it along and really showcase it and show it off. And so it's just a little bit of a different model, but it doesn't mean, you know, it's the wrong model just because they want money. I buy horses kind of like, everybody always says like, well, where do you shop for your horses? And my answer is anywhere I can find them. You know, and I have connections kind of all over, and, you know, they're looking to me because maybe, you know, maybe they do just want enough money to pay that training bill. And there's nothing wrong with that. If the horse is sound and it can have another career, like I'm all for that. And I think we should, you know, absolutely support those that are maybe looking, you know, to profit, and not say, you know, profit as a bad word, right? I'm always saying that, you know, profit is not a bad word. This is about, you know, showcasing that thoroughbreds are, you know, a breed that is in demand and desirable. So, you know, we should celebrate that. We should price our horses, you know, accordingly. And there's nothing wrong with that.
I'm glad you touched on that, Jess, because I think that's definitely something that we talk a lot about here. And, you know, one of the original ways that we kind of would convey our mission was kind of like to like the way Stuart, our founder, would kind of pitch it was like, we have a supply and demand issue. Like we have more horses entering retirement than there is demand for them. And so the value has fallen down. And so that's when you see horses getting into at-risk situations. And I think I will also say, like, profiting is never an ugly word. And I think that is like a common misconception in nonprofit space as well, is that like it's actually like really poorly named. And I think that a discussion that we need to be having on the whole in aftercare is the kind of charitable connotations that come with the word aftercare, and recognizing that like not every single horse that's entering retirement is a charity case. And you need this kind of spectrum of people that are participating in all these different modalities to meet the needs of different horses, to meet the needs of different horsemen and connections. You guys both made such great points about like, you know, syndicates at different levels, and you know, the kind of lower, more blue collar connection that doesn't have the ability to you know, like Mike Rapoli, retire everybody at the gold standard at new vocations and send his donation. And like there's just such a big spread in terms of the kind of like socioeconomic levels of racing that we have to account for. And so we need an aftercare industry that is just as diverse, that can answer all those needs. You know, the tough thing about nonprofit, and if we rely too heavily on charitable organizations, is that charitable organizations cannot charge what a horse is worth. That's, you know, outside of the scope of a C3. So it's still super healthy and super good, like in the best interest of the horse, for it to have the kind of other end of people who are able to sell them for what they're worth. And that's for the betterment of everybody. And I'm glad that, Jen, that you brought up Wasabi, because not only are there, each and every one of you have experience with their horses, but Sarah Murphy in the chat says that she has a horse as well from Wasabi, and that they follow up on him and have shared his info. And I think Michelle and TK are obviously super savvy, but I think that's so wise of them, you know, from a business structure decision, to have established a charitable arm to their racing venture, and to engage and educate everybody within their syndicate about the importance of that. You know, I think that we see this trend going towards syndication, which I think is so healthy for getting new people involved in the sport. And these syndicates that are having that conversation with their owners and making it kind of a required element to their ownership is just so responsible and so great on so many levels. And I'm just so happy to see that. I want to just take a pause for a minute. And again, if anybody has anything that they want to add in the Q&A as a question, or anything to contribute, please, by all means. I have a great comment here from Rick Schoschberg, who is on the board of TAA, and just kind of touching on the evolution of the TAA's work and how it's the education and awareness and exposure has been great, but with that has also created a little bit of a false sense of comfort or confidence in that you know, you do your kind of mandatory checkoffs that are built into registrations or purse pledges or anything like that, and you feel kind of like, I've done my part for aftercare. And the reality is that we all know what it costs to take care of horses, and that's not enough. And so again, like, we need this kind of full spectrum of people that are participating in these different ways. So tough question. How can we, you know, to Rick's point, he says more education with some tough love to go with it for our owners and our breeders and our connections. How can we have that conversation in a way that does not diminish like the valuable contributions of the TAA and also continues to bolster the efforts of everybody within the aftercare space? Nose goes.
I just think it's, you know, it's hard to have sort of an honest discussion sometimes about when horses retire, what the retirement options look like for each horse based on the level of soundness that the horse has. You know, I always felt like that was the challenging part when I worked with the nonprofit, was that some of these horses realistically were not able to have second careers. So we need to sort of maybe make that point of, if you want to retire this horse and it cannot have a second career, it's going to cost this much to keep this horse, you know, for the rest of its life at this nonprofit or wherever it may be. And then, you know, what is the cost of a horse that can, you know, have a second career? Because I think those are numbers that maybe people outside of, you know, the, you know, that are in the racing industry don't necessarily understand. They think, okay, well, we're going to donate this horse, or somebody's going to buy this horse. And what does that look like? What do those numbers look like? Because, like, I do agree with what you said, in that nonprofits need to, you know, function as a business, and, you know, being smart about, you know, you can take in a couple of horses and they can drain all your, you know, your funds. So it's really important to have an open discussion about, you know, what the soundness level of each horse means as far as retirement.
Yeah, and following what Jess says, as a nonprofit, that is a very tough conversation, especially when we go to see the horse at the track and we're looking at the diagnostics and we're kind of saying, you know, point blank in front of the trainer or the owner, you know, this horse may have this sort of career or may not have this sort of career. And as a nonprofit, we take all of our horses back, but it takes 1, 2, 3 horses. I mean, I've had horses up to 2 years in our organization before they find homes, and doing, you know, running the numbers and looking at it. I mean, you know, especially if you provide medical care or surgery or whatever, we sometimes have trainers that look at, or owners that look at us sideways when we relay those costs and say, this is what we've spent so far, and this is the road that we're going to follow to keep going. And the one horse that I had, gosh, I've had him, or I did have him, I finally found a home, almost 3 years. I think was up to maybe $35,000 that we put into this horse. And he has a great career now, but it was a really long road. And so I think we need to emphasize more of just visual numbers to our owners and our trainers and say, you know, and we know that, you know, obviously racehorses make the owners and trainers money, but, you know, we say, okay, you know, what kind of, like Jess said, like, what kind of career, what kind of aftercare, what kind of retirement do you want your horse to have? And it's a really tough conversation. Like, nobody really wants to have that conversation, but I think back to evolving and, you know, what we were talking about before is we still have a long way to go, is we have to have these tough conversations about this. So, you know, I mean, I could go on forever about horses that I've had, and we have sanctuary horses. So we have about 11 or 12 right now, including 2 stallions. And, we're very blessed. One of our stallions says, he gets monthly support, but some of those horses don't really get monthly support. They get public support, and it is really tough, but they really, they're old pensioners or old stake horses. They've had their career, but they don't have really a future. So they stay in sanctuary, and the numbers are quite large to house them at the end of the day.
Touching on what you were talking about, like sometimes, actually both of you talked about, sometimes owners and trainers just truly don't understand what a horse can or can't do as a second career based on what their physical is as they're coming off of the track, the injuries they have or whatnot. And I'm involved with the TAA on their communications committee, and we've talked about how to do this. We haven't come up with a solution yet. But the need for continuing education for trainers and for owners to help them better understand aftercare and outcomes and the process of aftercare and everything we're talking about right now. Because I think part of it is just truly like ignorance is bliss, but then there also is the side of it where people they don't want to sometimes be involved on the aftercare side because maybe they do know what that costs. And the thing I'm thinking about is this Twitter thread that I saw probably 2 years ago now that stuck with me so much. And it was, there was a horse running at Mountaineer, and somebody posted the PPs on the horse. And they were like, why in the world is this horse that just won an allowance being dropped down for claiming for? And someone else chimed in and said, oh, they're just dropping it in to try to lose it. It must have an issue. When someone else chimes in with their story about how they had a horse that was so expensive with vet bills and whatnot, that they just dropped it in to make it become someone else's problem so they wouldn't have to be paying those vet bills. And the kicker was, this thread just kept going on, and this other person chimed in that made me want to flip a table and said the goal of racing at the claiming level, or maybe they just said the goal in horse racing, is to not own the horse when it retires. And I was enraged, and I ended up just like asking a few very benign questions and getting blocked by half the people because they probably looked at my Twitter handle and saw that I was involved with aftercare. But it was so surprising to me on a couple levels. One, that there was that mentality in racing, but two, that they felt like it was so acceptable that they were flagrantly talking about it on social media for God and everyone to see. So I think continuing education, and I also think aftercare being incorporated into probably phase 2 or 3 of HISA, because they've got so many things that they're trying to incorporate into phase 1 going into 2. But I think those would help to move us forward in the aftercare world and just get people to be a little bit more realistic about what the numbers are, like you're talking about, Nina, associated with like the cost of getting these horses moved on, and what Jess is talking about with like what horses can realistically do in their second career based on the condition they are in when they come off of the track.
Yeah, and touching base back on it, I was thinking a little bit about it today. Of course, we want to get a horse in and we want to find it a home right away. But the goal is for the home to work. Of course, we always accept our horses back, but we're obligated to give that horse time. And that might be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, whatever it may be, for that horse to get right, to get into a career that's acceptable for them, to move forward and be perfect for their adopter, their buyer, their new home. And it's tough with the expense, especially in the wintertime. Everybody knows the wintertime, it's more hay, it's more straw, it's more, help, things like that. But social media, I think, is great, but I also think in a sense that it's damaging sometimes. And like you were saying, about Twitter, I've seen threads and threads that same thing. I just want to like throw something across the room because people don't understand. They don't see the big picture about, they're like, and some people are owners or trainers are like, oh, this horse is an aftercare. It's great. Well, that's great. But, it's not just, you just don't wave by and the horse, finds a magic home. There's a lot of work involved in it and a lot of money and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that that horse has the best possible outcome. And then after, the afterwards of it too is the follow-up and make sure that things are working. So, and I think there was a good question on here that Kyle asked, like, what is the best method of communication for the racing community as far as providing them with information and education, email, social media, or in person? And we do all of the above. I'm kind of horrible I used to do my newsletters, but I got a little busy, but we try and take to social media or, provide information through seminars or education in person or webinars or whatever. So I think if we just keep pushing that and evolving with aftercare, it eventually may start to kind of spark some people.
I do think we've all kind of touched on it, but, showing the results of what you do, for me, it's always showing connecting the people that you buy horses from with the horses' new owners and providing those pictures, providing those updates, because that's kind of what gets a lot of people, like, say this is the first time a trainer has had to rehome a horse and they really don't know if they're doing the right thing. When they see this horse in its second career, out there, doing things, I do think it encourages them to do it again and again and again. And I think that is really important, is kind of that thread that connects everybody together. It's not just about getting that horse at home, but making sure that you then, highlight what that horse is doing in its new home, send updates, all that kind of stuff, because it just like keeps people coming back. I mean, I always say, like, that's what makes people want to sell me horses, is that we are like really big on social media, showing our horses in their second careers, having like a graduates page, that kind of stuff, to show these horses are happy, they're in new careers, they're loved, it's like kind of just that thread. And like a lot of times it's like the people that buy the horses then connect with the trainers and like they provide updates, and it just creates this great like sense of community. And I do think that does so much for getting these trainers to realize, what the value of aftercare is all about.
I have this like kind of list of questions here, like, God forbid we couldn't fill an hour. But I also feel like we've done a pretty good job of touching on a lot of the high points of what I wanted to get to in our list. But I also still feel like we almost need like an encore or something like that, because I feel like there's so much more that we could talk about as well. I do want to make sure that we leave some time to just kind of wind down and just touch on some of the questions that are here in the Q&A section. Lindsay says, in my province, I'm finding that we can sell horses off track for better money. It seems to help the owners, trainers feel that there's more value in retiring them one race sooner. Do you think that that's helpful incentive in the US, even though that there are more options for aftercare in the US? I think resoundingly, like, yes. We've kind of touched on that in a couple of the different answers and everything, but absolutely. And we're seeing that trend too. The RRP collects a tremendous amount of data on every horse that goes through the makeover. We've always tracked the price of what people are paying to acquire their horses, but we're also looking at how many races, how long between last race and acquisition, like post-race. And average earnings. So we're seeing that there's been like a slow drop in average starts and a bit of an increase in average earnings, which could be an indicator that we're retiring a little bit sooner, a little bit higher up in the racing levels, which again, we know is great for the horses and just great for the overall outcome. But still, yes, like we do need the horses selling at higher prices directly off the track, kind of speaking to Jessica's point about, knowing that they can sell the horses for a little chunk of change as opposed to having to make a donation somewhere, and that they have that option is still really important to the kind of bigger picture here in your friendly neighbor to the south as well. Deb Hamilton says, how can lawyers inform new owners or longtime owners to help them be smart about next stops for their horses? I think just to give a shameless plug, we do have our next Tuesday section is with Laura Holobeck at Dinsmore, and who specializes in contract law and equine and gaming. And we're going to be doing some great stuff in terms of like making sure that you have a good contract. So I think there's a little bit of overflow there, and you should definitely join us for that session. But does anybody have any suggestions?
I saw this question, and in that same chat is Rick Schosberg, who's a former multiple grade 1 winning trainer and is like, has done more than anyone for Aftercare in New York and possibly in racing in general. He's amazing. But he told me one time years ago when I saw him on the backside up at Saratoga, and I asked him about something related to Aftercare. I used him as a sounding board so much. He's such a huge resource. But we started talking about Aftercare, and he said when he gets a new owner in his barn, the first conversation they have before they ever talk about running the horse, before that horse ever gets to its first race under his name, is Aftercare. What is your plan if and when that horse is going to need to retire? Because every horse is going to need to retire, whether it's because they get slow, they have no talent, they get hurt, whatever. But he is very proactive, or was. He recently retired from training to do Aftercare even more. But he talked about how that is one of the first conversations he has with a new owner, and he had no problem letting them know if they were not the right fit, if their Aftercare goals and interests didn't align with his personal ethics on that topic, which I thought was so respectable. And I'm sure he's coached a lot of other trainers to have those conversations. But I thought that was a really important step, because the trainer is who these owners look to for guidance on their horse. So for that to be on equal footing with every other aspect of racing and the scale of conversations, I think was really important.
I'm not sure if all of the attendees can see the Q&A section, but just to piggyback off of that, the comment that Jen was mentioning from Rick was, just again, focusing on that kind of alleviating the one last race mentality, but also the horsemen need to know that they have confidence in the transitional program, and that they can move horses more quickly. So again, I think that speaks to having, different modalities available and different channels available, so that, if one facility is full, there's other options that they can explore. And so it's good, so much of this industry and being successful just comes down to networking and building, just a good community around your program and what you're trying to do, and building up that trustworthiness as well. So I do think that that's something that we all have to really focus on. But yes, we do need to have kind of like the full involvement, and so that the horsemen understand that they have options. Let's see. Let's see. Kyle, we touched a little bit on your question, but I don't know if anybody has anything else to add. I do personally understand your pain in terms of like, what is the best way to communicate to the racing industry. I think, just overall messaging and everything is received a little bit different than how we would market within the aftercare industry itself or to the equestrian industry. And I know that you're very savvy about that sort of thing, but I think that that's part of the difficulty of just kind of racing overall, right? In that you have all of these different jurisdictions and all of like, you know, there might be somebody that's the aftercare liaison here and they have a track-based program there, and you know, how to like effectively reach all of those people is difficult. Do you guys, in kind of your experience building your own networks, like have anything to add for Kyle's question?
I know when I worked for Canner and we were doing the Delaware Park program, you know, doing the listings, we literally went into every barn at Delaware Park and talked to the trainers, you know, just told them what we do, told them how we did it. And I think that just showing up and just sort of explaining there is a program, there is another path, there is another career, and kind of, you know, just proving that it works goes a long way, because I know when I started that, there were trainers that would not let us in their barn. You know, they were like, get out of here, you know, and by the end of the time that we were there, you know, they were happily like, come on in, take some pictures of our horses. And, you know, let's face it, like race trackers are different. They're just, you know, some of them are, like I just say, like, they don't really understand the sport horse world. They don't want to deal with the sport horse world. They don't understand it. They maybe don't like it. And we need to like bridge that gap, right, between the track and the rehoming. And I think that's why, you know, like those of us that are on this panel have such a varied background, because you need to be able to talk to people that are in the racing industry and make it relatable to the sport horse industry. They don't always understand that it's like two different worlds. So having people that can walk between the two make a big difference sometimes.
Yeah, I think that is super important. And it's not the same audience top to bottom. You know, the trainer at Mahoning with 3 horses that he's listed as the owner trainer on, that maybe hasn't even graduated high school, you're not going to have the same conversation with him about aftercare or transitioning horses or whatever as you are with like Todd Pletcher, one of his big owners, you know? So it's knowing how to communicate to the different audiences in ways that they will find approachable, and also reaching them like in the ways that they would be the best, be in the best mindset to digest the message that you're trying to put out there. So, you know, for some it might be email, or for some it might be a text or a phone call, and for some they don't really use computers and you need to see them in the barns and talk to them there. Some might be old school and want to get a letter or like a pamphlet or something in the mail. So I think you have to be really cognizant about who your audience is, their socioeconomic background, as well as their age, as you know, all those factors weigh in.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, about what you said. We've gotten everybody from, you know, the up and coming young trainer that's great with technology and can text and email and do social media, to somebody that's in their 80s and they will literally mail us a snail mail letter, which is totally fine. But I think you have to be able to cater to everybody, like you said, top to bottom. Like there's not one model that's going to fit every owner or trainer in aftercare. And that's kind of the beauty of it as well, is just being able to kind of customize how you approach, you know, people in racing. For me, I personally like walking into somebody's barn if they let you, and shaking their hand or picking up the phone. And, you know, we get a lot of, I would say we get a lot more emails than we do phone calls, or we get text messages on our business line. We get just random text messages. But in all honesty, I really, if it's kind of a local track, and I mean, we get horses from all over. I've gotten horses from other countries. If it's a local track, I really don't mind getting in my car and driving and meeting them and shaking their hand on the backside and looking at the horse and, you know, building. I think it's very important to build that rapport with that trainer, because word spreads. I went down one year to West Virginia and on the backside of Charlestown, and then all of a sudden, like we were handing out flyers and shaking hands, and we took a couple horses from one trainer who was pretty old school, would write a handwritten letter. And then soon enough, like another trainer was calling us. And then that trainer said, oh, I gave your card to this. And it just kind of like webbed out. And it was pretty cool. But in that same aspect, we're able to continuously not only, step them and guide them through the way of aftercare. Like this is what to expect, and this is what we do, and this is how we handle it. But also on the flip side of when you sell or adopt that horse out, here's what your horse is doing now. They just tackled 3-day eventing, or they went down, in Kentucky and they were in the big ring for dressage, and they think that's really cool. So it's all how, again, you have to have different models for different, the different levels of people that you're dealing with. And back to, I think our oldest, we had a gentleman that was 87 years old and he talked very slow on the phone and liked a handwritten letter. So it's pretty cool.
I think you also have to be able to speak their language, and I think Jess was hitting on that a little bit. Like, you need to understand racing enough to be able to speak their language, because like Jess was saying, with the race trackers, a lot of times are a different breed, especially the older ones or at the lower levels. And if they don't feel like you have respect for their sport, they are going to have no interest in talking to you about your side of the sport in a lot of cases. So I think it's really important to have a pretty good working understanding of racing and training and their day to day, and be able to kind of meet them on their playing field before you try to get them over to yours.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's just a handful of questions left here, and I don't want to hang on here too long at this point. I know it's getting late in the evening, but you guys have had such good points. So I'm just going to quickly address a couple of these, and then there's one more in this that I think is a really great just kind of conclusion question. So Lisa, you asked about if you have horses in your program and they need maintenance, do you fundraise for vet work? I would encourage you to attend. We have a session later in the month that talks about marketing difficult to place horses. So I would check that one out, because I think there will be more relevant resources for your particular question in there. And maybe if you guys want to hang on a little bit, we might be able to kind of go into a little bit of overtime, but I just kind of want to try to address these. Sarah, wanting to generate sponsorship, and particularly with organizations that have a significant amount of sanctuary horses. I think that's something that we're seeing, in conversations that I've had with Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. Nina, I know that you have some sanctuary horses as well. Maybe we can circle back on that and touch there. Lauren, biggest struggles that you all have found with regards to marketing and selling on horses online. Again, I think that some of the sessions that we're going to have later this month on networking horses and networking within the industry are going to be covering that sort of thing a little bit more closely. So I hope that you are signed up to join us for those. If you guys want to hang out past into a little bit of overtime and cover any of those things, you're welcome to, but I'm just going to put this one out as our kind of like wrap up question. So this is an anonymous question from somebody who has only ever owned OTTBs, has a lot of background in retraining, and is looking at getting into aftercare space like as a full-time gig. And I think that's the plot twist in all of this, is that, we said full-time gig, but a lot of us are doing it wrapped up into other things too. So you can still make an impact and not necessarily have to give up the day job, so to speak. But I think the great question here is pros versus cons of going for profit or nonprofit. Where are the kind of pitfalls, or again, pros or cons, and which direction would you go, and what first steps would you take?
So the pros of a nonprofit would be public support, grants, being able to join organizations such as the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. I believe those are great pros, especially if you do get in horses that may take longer to place or are limited or harder to place. You can definitely, solicit for donations, apply for grants, that sort of thing. The cons of it is a lot of paperwork. You have to track every penny, keeping a decent board, having board meetings, keeping minutes. So there's a little bit more of a paperwork trail, not to say that on a business aspect, there's not as well. It's just a different type of paperwork trail. So if you're willing to put into the work, and there's a lot of legalities, state to state, federal, that sort of thing too. So having a good legal counsel behind you to make sure that, and of course, like a CPA, which is also needed in business, just to make sure that you're running everything by the books and that you're doing your job well. Those are definitely my pros and cons. I think the paperwork aspect, and I'm really lucky to have a great team behind me that processes, applications or answers emails or helps with our reporting and our inventory and numbers and things like that. That is what the most important aspect is to have a great team behind you that assists you with it. And I'm pretty sure Jess would agree, as well as in business too, is having a team behind you.
Do you want to go next, Jess, or do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah, so I've kind of done both models, but I would say that one thing that frustrated me a little bit when I was in the nonprofit is I was working really hard, doing a lot of retraining, putting months and months of time into these horses. We were having them out at shows and going to clinics, and we were really limited in our price point because people felt that because these horses were part of a nonprofit, that the prices should be capped. I believe, like the most expensive horse we sold was like $5,000, and that horse had been hunting and doing all this stuff. And it was just always so frustrating for me because these horses were just had so much time invested in them, and they were sound. And I felt like, boy, like we could really be like bringing in a lot more money, which would help a lot more horses. But I felt like the general outlook was we just couldn't do that because we were a nonprofit. So for me, I do enjoy the ability to set my prices because, as we all know, there's some horses that you do really well on. And then there's other horses that you might not do well. I've had plenty of horses that have come in that have needed, surgeries and layups and things like that. And I feel like I get a good buffer from the profits that I'm able to make on some of the nicer horses to then, help the horses. And I definitely take in horses that I know have, minor injuries and things like that. But I think I can do that because I'm able to make the profits on those other horses. I do work a full-time job just because I feel like when you run your own business and you do it, there's a lot more risk involved. Their sales are, as we know, sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down, and some months are great and some months, you haven't sold a horse. So for me, I just feel better to have, sort of that outside income, and just that allows me to know that I never have to sell a horse. For me, selling a horse is when I have a good match, when the home is right, when the horse is ready. I'm not forced to like have to make, a sale just to survive. So everybody does it their own way. Cons, definitely for me, like cons are just that, I do have to shoulder all the expenses when things go wrong. It can be really astronomically expensive and you can't fundraise. I think I did like 3 crypt orchids last year, and those surgeries are at least like $3,000 a piece, and it was just like boom, boom, boom. I got hit from all, it's like, seems like it comes all at once, and you're like, oh my God, this is just never ending vet bills, and you can't reach out to anybody. You're kind of like stuck. But that's that's part of it. But you know, you kind of have to be in it for the ups and downs, I guess.
Yeah, you kind of said very similarly to what I was thinking. Like on the for-profit side, you make the decisions. Like when you want that horse to be sold is when that horse is up for sale. Whereas on the nonprofit side, you know, so many of my friends in the nonprofit aftercare world, they always feel like, you know, the nice horses, they put a ride or two on and then they're gone and they don't get to develop them. And the not as nice horses, like, you know, they're stuck trying to not get too backlogged with that many of them. So it's just like you're always trying to churn them out to get more in, because there's donors who want their horses to come to you because they've donated money. And it's just like you're always trying to keep the process going. Sorry, my dogs have but then like the con is that you pay for everything. With us, a lot of our profits from the yearlings that we sold last year, we had a lot of horses that need expensive rehabs last year just by coincidence. And the year before, we just had a lot of horses that were sound and got off the track and were ready for a second career a lot quicker. So we actually made a profit on the aftercare side 2 years ago that paid for our shortfall on the yearling side. And then last year it was vice versa. So if you're a nonprofit, you kind of have this base of support and you can engage all of your donors and sponsors and do all of this fundraising. On the for-profit side, it's all on you, but at the same time, you're not having to beg for money when things get lean, which happens on the nonprofit side all the time.
I think you guys brought up like really good points across the board, and there's no wrong answer. I think we have kind of managed to illustrate so well what I was hoping to get out of this session was that, like, you know, participate in aftercare in the way that works for you. There's no perfect way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do it. And there's so many different ways that you can do it. So thank you guys for that. I still feel like we could do an encore, but I did go ahead and turn off the questions. So there are still those questions that I brought up from earlier. If any of you panelists want to touch on any of the subjects, if you have anything in particular, you're more than welcome to, but we're bang on at an hour and a half, and I don't want to drag this out if anybody needs to go back to their family life for the evening.
I was just going to say about the Sarah Murphy question regarding the best ways to generate sponsorship. There are so many caveats to that and like questions that need to be asked to give a good answer to that. But that's my background. So I'll put my email in this one. And Sarah, if you want to respond to me in email, I'm more than happy to talk with you and try to help you brainstorm on some stuff that would work for your organization based on just what your challenges are and size and scope and all that.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jen.
I'll touch base with what Lisa asked. If you have a horse with potential but needs maintenance, do you fundraise for vet work? So I'm going to say yes in a general whole, only because vet work can also mean farrier work when the vet is working with the farrier. So, you know, sometimes we've had horses come in that just have, you know, horrendous feet or just need, you know, a good change of shoes, like glue-ons or wedges or whatever, to get their hoof normal in the angles, and they're going to have a great outcome. But I think we had a mare and we spent in 4 to 6 weeks, about $1,200 on her between shoes. And it was a really long process. And we did fundraise for her. And she's great now. Like, it's now like a year later and she's fantastic. She'll always need very strict maintenance on her feet. But as far as like, you know, joint injections, things like that, we don't necessarily fundraise for individual little things such like that, but we will fundraise, you know, if there are bigger things or diagnostics needed or things like that. So, you know, again, as a nonprofit, you have that leeway that you can apply, that you can reach out to the public, or not even just reaching out for fundraising, you can apply for grants. You know, there's after the finish line, based out of California. That's
On this call. Yeah.
that's assisted us greatly. So yeah, we do. I'm going to say as a general, yes, we do some fundraising, and we do go after grants if they are eligible.
And Lisa, if you're the Lisa that I think you are, you may already know Dawn out there in California, but you guys should connect if you haven't already. Let's see. And then this is, you know, Lauren's question is such a universal question. Biggest struggles that you have with marketing and selling horses online. What kinds of things do you wish we had available to help with this in Aftercare?
So I can probably talk a little bit about that. I mean, there were a couple of years ago where pretty much every horse sale ad on Facebook was like getting flagged, and that became really difficult. I know there were a couple people, you know, different, you know, spin-offs trying to get a way to advertise, but I've just always felt like Facebook is still the way that everybody's advertising now. You know, I feel like I get you know, most of like the interaction is through there, maybe Instagram. I'm not too big into TikTok, but I see people using TikTok for that as well. And it's just, you know, marketing horses effectively is just it's still like a business in itself. You know, for me, it's like all about good pictures and videos. I feel like I could just like write a book on trying to teach people how to take better pictures and videos. More people would be able to rehome their horses if they just spent a little bit more time, you know, actually using a real camera, a real video camera, and doing some basic editing and standing horses up for good comfo pictures, things like that. You know, it's no different than anything else, but it's like what draws your eye, right? You know, whenever you're scrolling through Facebook, it's like what catches your eye, you know. So for me, I'm always trying to like, you know, make pictures that catch people's eye, make videos that are like short and sweet. You know, people's got like a small attention span, so you just need to like really get it right the first time. You know, like really like 5 good pictures sometimes is like all you need. But of course, that's, you know, the challenge that we all have is that we're really busy, and you know, who does your pictures and videos, who does your online marketing. You know, sometimes that might mean that you're the one that has to do that instead of doing the riding, or you have to find somebody that's like their niche, and you know, hire them. I feel like people maybe should invest money in people that, you know, like do their ads because that's what sells horses. I mean, it really is. You know, people are like, well, why are you so successful? And I'm like, we do a good job, but we also do a good job marketing. And I know that because people tell us that all the time, like your pictures and videos are like what, you know, highlights your horses so well. So I think people could really, you know, focus on that, and like that's the one area that I would just like always say to people, just spend your time there. Good pictures, good videos.
Yeah, I can like the RRP as part of the Thoroughbred Makeover offers a marketplace for horses that are completing the Thoroughbred Makeover, and we do a considerable amount of coaching every year on you know, putting together resources. Like I can tell you like off the top of my head that there is at least maybe 2 or 3 like full-length articles with like examples of like good and bad photos. Like RRP staff have like personally gone out and taken hideous pictures of their own horses just to illustrate like what a difference it makes. But truly just putting the effort into you know, solid pictures, solid video, proofreading your copy for your ads. It really, like amongst the ladies on this call, like you have some of the people that are doing that exceptionally well in this industry, and particularly Jessica. Like I know that if I see a horse like fancy free trotting around an arena and stood up really nice and square, like in front of her barn, like I know that that's Jessica, and that's very much like her trademark, which I think has really helped her build her client base over all these years. But there's definitely some good resources on the RRP website. But I mean, everybody on this call, like please, again, if you have anything to add, have some good minds.
Yeah, I think just, you know, going off what Jessica said, there's a big difference between an iPhone photo and a professional photo for sure. And we kind of did an experiment one time. We took one horse and we took just stood him up square, just took a regular iPhone photo. And then we brought out like the big pro camera, same angle, same everything, and posted them 2 different days. And the post that had the professional photos in it got way more likes and comments than, and it was the same exact horse. But I think, keeping things short and sweet, because again, people kind of tend to skip the lines a little bit, and they're like, well, where is this horse located? And how old is this horse, and how tall is this horse? So to alleviate a lot of unnecessary questions, just putting your solid basic information in front of the ad, like located in Chester County, Pennsylvania, 4-year-old 16 hand, and just getting right to the point. But it is a struggle because you might have out of 10 people, only one super serious person that really wants to come see the horse, versus the other 9 are asking those questions that are kind of already in that ad set. So that's kind of like a frustration or a struggle that we all go through it. When people are responding to ads, we kind of read and we're like, oh, well, it's in the ad, but it's not necessarily at the top emphasized. It's kind of like in the middle. So it's really important to have that package and just get short, sweet, to the point with those great pictures and that great video, and the main information up front.
I think too, I wanted to add, because I forgot to say this, is that one thing that I added a couple of years back is I developed my website, and I just put all my policies right on my website, like a FAQ section. Here's the bedding policy, here's the deposit, here's the shipping, here's how many days we hold horses, here's how much we charge if the horse is here 5 days after it's vetted. And I just like wrote this big section of kind of all the important information that somebody might like want to know up front before they do that. And that has cut down on a lot of the questions, because, again, it's like, we're all super busy. And for me, it's just like all the questions that can be answered are just, one less thing that I have to do. And I always say to people, go to the website. It has all the, confo pictures, the videos, everything, the price, because now you can't put prices on Facebook. So I think people always like forget that, so I'm like, it's on the website, go there, please look. And it also tells me if people are serious, if they've actually been to my website and read it.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you guys just said. The only thing I would add is a challenge I think we all deal with is just unrealistic expectations of what people are shopping for in horses. There's this trend that people want absolute perfection in horses. And like, if you vetted any of the people shopping or any of us, there would be imperfections on their x-rays, and those would have nothing to do with their ability to do anything. But it's the same with horses. Like, it's so rare to find perfection, but people are very, very quick to discount a horse based on things that they really don't understand, because they're looking for that unicorn. You see ISOs for unicorns all day, every day on Facebook. So I wish there was a way to encourage these shoppers to do a little bit more to educate themselves about what they're realistically looking for, and just shop smarter. I think that's a huge challenge that's coming up more and more.
And just like education on what injuries, do not limit a horse in their second career, because so many injuries do not limit horses in their second careers. And it's really hard for all of us that are trying to rehome these horses, to say, look, these horses have XYZ, but this does not limit them. And, I just feel like the more education we can do on that is just going to help everyone.
Yeah, that's
You do a really good job of that in your descriptions, Jessica. Like, you
try.
You have such a good story about a realistic view of what each horse has, but your opinion based on over however many 1,000, 2,000 horses of what that means for this horse's future. I think it's so educational for people, the way you put that out there. Very eloquent.
Well, and you should always, like, I just put it in the ad because, right, when people are shopping, everybody is going to have their things that they just like can't live with, right? So, I just feel like every ad should be transparent. If the horse has an old bow, if it cribs, if it, has whatever, just say it. I even put stuff like it has a scar on its shoulder, because even though that doesn't matter to me, it may really matter to somebody else. I think I wrote an ad about a horse today, and I was like, she has two white, she has white in her eyes. She looks kind of crazy. I mean, she does. I look at her and she always looks like she's got like a crazy look on her face. And I mean, that means nothing to me, but I know so many people that will not buy a horse that has like white in their eyes. So put it in your ad, because it just saves everybody's time, and I always feel like all my ads are like part education, right? I'm like, I've had 100 horses with bows that do not affect them. Like horses with bows are running at the upper levels every day. Like, let's stop, making things a big deal. Like, I just like refuse to get spun up about kissing spine. You can't make me get excited about these things. And I just feel like those of us who are doing so many horses should just talk about the things we see every day and how these horses are like getting careers and they're doing fine. And, try to like be realistic, try to show that these horses can have these injuries and, still go on and do really high level jobs.
Yeah. And I think, to add on, this one, 9th place in 2017 at RRP, that horse had a sesamoid injury. He got passed up by so many people. I had him for like a year and we did everything. I mean, I took care of him, but we went like cross country. We schooled over at Boyd Martin's. I mean, we went everywhere. And I, honestly have to call out, like, this horse had a sesamoid fracture and it doesn't really limit him. And there he was like, what, 9th out of 69 or 70 horses. So as I proudly display, unfortunately he's not with me anymore. I lost him in 2019, but I think back again, like, as a nonprofit, I don't think that, or a business or anything, if you're in aftercare, I think education about injuries that don't limit horses, like bows or sesamoids or whatever, is really, really important. And I think it's important to put in ads, just so, if you have somebody that's serious enough that says, oh, I've had horses with bows before, or I've had horses with this before, or whatever. And I get people that come up to me that are previous adopters or buyers or whatever, and they say, I'll say, well, this horse had a sesamoid, and they say, oh, that doesn't bother me. I have 3 in my barn right now. And we just had one that went down, I think it was an Aiken for tip, and she was like high score hunter down there taking money home. And we had a ton of people that were passing her up. She was sound. She was super sound. So I think the education is seriously very important too.
Yeah, it sounds like, excuse me, in summary, like, it's not necessarily that, for those of us that are, doing the selling and the placement, it's not that we need more outlets to list the horse. Like, there's no shortage of that sort of thing. There's tons of places that you can list a horse. Obviously, like, I'm fond of the RRP, but like, to Jessica's point, like, Facebook is really still where everybody's at, and you can't fight that. And I think what it really comes down to is like, having that marketing that stands out, and having being really like transparent and disclosure in, what it is that you're trying to sell, and, just avoid wasting everybody's time. That doesn't mean that everybody's reading comprehension is all that great, which we also know can be really frustrating, but I do want to give a nod to New Vocations in this space, because they've developed their rating system for their horses, which I think is super shopper friendly, especially if you're not super into reading like the full-blown narrative around a horse. Like, I think that that's such a great thing that they've come up with on their website. They have the rubric that describes the rating system, and then you can kind of filter through based on that. And it's just a really good way to get the buyer like informed in a like kind of quick way that gets them kind of keyed into what you have that's going to be appropriate for them and their goals. So I love that system so much, and just had to give a nod to it. Look, folks, it's been swell. I really am thrilled with the information that we shared today. I again, we just covered so much ground and touched on so much, and I'm just really pleased with how this went. So I'm going to release this panel for the evening and encourage everybody to be back in this space next Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. And we'll be having fun with contracts. For more information about Aftercare Industry Month and the remaining sessions for the month of February, visit our website at www.therrp.org. And have a wonderful evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful job, guys. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye.